I attended a wedding yesterday. It was one of my descendants, one of my family from my mother's side of the family. A niece of mine was married yesterday, my sister's daughter. And I went to the wedding, and it was a destination wedding at a farm that was in the sort of the larger Chico area out in the orchards. It was a beautiful place, a beautiful farmhouse. And whoever owns this place has opened it up for events, and which is very common now. But I think it's great because in these events, these weddings, we kind of go back to the earthiness. We go back to the orchards, the trees. We go back to nature. And as I walked into the venue, I noticed the presence of two flowers. And one of them was bottle brush with this bright red attention grabber, you know. And the other one was a flower that grabs your attention through its smell, and that was honeysuckle. And those two, there were two large swaths of those, honeysuckle and bottle brush. And both of those are flowers that the pollinators love, and so there were lots of bees around, and it was really wonderful. And when the scent of the honeysuckle caught my attention, and when the vision of the bottle brush caught my attention, I was transported back to the presence of 5 women in my life. And they were my grandmother, my mom, and her 3 sisters, my aunts. And early on in my life, when I look back in my life and I construct where I've traveled, my father's side of the family was very patriarchal. He had 2 brothers. His father was a pretty prominent figure. His mom had passed away when he was a child, and he had a stepmother who, my dad, I think, struggled with connecting to, and I think his brothers did as well. But she was there, and she was a loving person, and she did the best she could. So it was these 3 men and their father, and on my mom's side of the family, it was 5 women. And growing up, I resonated to the women, and I'm so grateful that I did. When my father got together with his brothers and his father, I lost interest in kind of what was going on. It was just my personality. It was nothing about them, but it was my personality. And for some reason, I gravitated towards the women. When we were together with my mom's family, I couldn't get enough of these 5 women. Wasn't to say they were perfect. I mean, it's like the Irish say, the sacred and the profane, and they could be sacred and they could be pretty profane at times. And they had their things between each other, but it was the way they operated. It was the way they talked to each other. It was what they were interested in. And I used to love to hang out with them when the conversation was in the midst of, they would be cooking together. There would be these large family gatherings, and these women would end up in the kitchen cooking together and working on the table together and gathering the flowers for the centerpiece. And they would have aprons on, and they would be barefoot in the kitchen with my grandmother, and they'd just be talking. And what I realized in this big extended family, because I had a lot of cousins, there were also a lot of women in that side of the family too, of my cousins, was I would listen to them talk about the family, check, and they would share who had lost a tooth and who was finally potty trained and who was going to college and who decided to run off with their girlfriend and who wrecked the car and who got the job and who graduated and who didn't graduate. And what I found out was that there was such an incredible level of care with these women, no matter who they were talking about, in terms of, you could say, well, there were some missteps or there were some good steps, and they just seemed to, they loved the family so much. And the way it showed up to me was the attention and the attentiveness of it. They would ask questions and they would listen, and they may be making up some mashed potatoes or tossing the salad or pulling the bread out of the oven or whatever, but you could see that they were listening to each other. And even sometimes when their voices overlapped, they got the gist of this, and they talked about what was going on in their lives. And I was so fascinated by that. And like I said, there were some challenges. My mom one of her sisters had gone through a divorce, and her daughter was in college, And so she went off to college in one of the, she went for 4 years. She was going to college in Southern California. And so this one, I'm not sure what year it was. So she goes off to college. Her parents are married. And by Christmas break, they were divorcing. So she was going to come home for Christmas. And I remember my aunt coming over and talking to my mom. And she was kind of beside herself. Not only was she going through a divorce, but she shared that her daughter was really upset with both of them, wanted to disown her parents. She didn't understand what was going on. And so my aunt and my mom got into some pretty intense conversations. Some of them I don't know because my mom told me I needed to go out and play or whatever. And so, but I do know that for Christmas, my cousin came back for Christmas break and came to our home. And I watched my mom connect with her. It was beautiful. And there was never the vitriol of the divorce and who's right and who's wrong. And gee, you need to, what are you putting your mother through and what are your parents putting you through? It's just, my mom was with her. My mom was with her anger and with her tears. And you would think that would make the holiday season kind of strange, but actually it made it very beautiful. And my aunt would come by from time to time during those couple of weeks and have dinner with us. And I could see my mom watching both of them, being present for them, letting them know, you're loved, and we're going to get through this. We're going to get to the other side. And there was no throwing away. There was no disowning. There was no breaking that presence. And I remember on Christmas Day, us all being together, and it was very beautiful in that way. And so I had these 5 women that were amazing. And then my life went into its own direction as I got older and I began to assert my own freedom. And I kind of moved beyond those 5 women a bit, especially in my 20s. And I did some, I took my life in its own journey. And I also broke from the religion I was raised in because in dissecting that, in deep, in looking back at that as to why I broke from religion, the religion I was raised in, there were a number of reasons. Again, my own personality showing up in that, my own way of coming into the world. And when I processed that, why did I break from that religion? It was because in the heavy patriarchal influence of that religion, I somehow struggled with that. I somehow struggled with when they would talk about the he God, the male God figure as all loving, all caring, but at the same time, I didn't get, you can love me and care for me, but you might throw me away through our eternity and, all that kind of stuff. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't feel like love to me. In the Old Testament, the Old Testament's like watching some kind of a mafia movie. There's all kinds of, killing each other and tribal stuff and pillars of salt and judgment. I mean, when I say judgment, I mean judgment raining down on people and all that kind of stuff. And I know there's some beautiful stories in the Old Testament, but, I was kind of freaked out by that. And so I moved away from the male part of it. In my early 30s, when I began to change my life and go in a better direction, and I had attracted into my life my wife Judy after having gone through a divorce and stuff like that, and she and I were, the kids were living with us, and I wanted to go in a new direction. I felt called back into. I wanted to find some form of spirituality, so I went to Centers for Spiritual Living. And one of the things I was attracted to was that the minister, my first minister, in the first place I went, brought in a healthy dose of the feminine. First of all, the minister was a woman, and then She brought in a healthy dose of the feminine. And so, you know, and I wasn't used to that, and I liked that. That was part of what I heard that I really liked. And there's a story in the New Testament, the Bible, from the biblical book of Matthew, and Jesus is in the marketplace, and there's a bunch of people hanging out around him, and they're talking about, well, do I have any value? I mean, does God love me? Do I matter? And this was going on because at that time in history, you know, there were, we all know that people sort of were birthed into economic status, you know, where you were born economically with your family and whatnot, and trade status, resources. That's where you were. I mean, you didn't move up, and so the religions of the day sometimes said that even had to do with whether you mattered or not. In other words, there were some lives who could become eternal, but there were some lives who were never going to be eternal because that's where people were born, and they just had to, well, that's where you are, man. That's your status, and that's kind of where you are. And so of the lower economic statuses in various cultures, that was kind of common at one time. And so at that time, there were people walking around who were born into the labor status. And that's who Jesus tended to hang out with. He hung out with fishermen and laborers and people like that, and they were lower status people. And so they're wandering out. This was a question because, like all of us, like Ernest Holmes talks about in his work, we have the divine urge. You know, is there something better for me? Can I have a better life? And so people were asking Jesus. They said, you know, does our life? Where do you come down on this, Jesus? Does our life matter? Do we have a shot at something better spiritually? Is there something in our journey that can improve? And Jesus looked over. They were in a marketplace, and there was a cage there with sparrows in it. And I'd done a little research on sparrows, and at the time, you know, sparrows were considered kind of a nuisance bird. They were everywhere, and people didn't see that they had a lot of value. And I think they were sold to feed to other animals and things like that. I'm not really sure why people were buying sparrows if they were a nuisance, but anyway, that's what history tells us. So he looks at them, and he looks back at these people. He said, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of Spirit's care. And even the very hairs on your head are known to the divine." And I remember one of my first classes in religious science, the question of how does Spirit show its love to us? This whole thing of, you know, from the metaphysical point of view, we tend to see Spirit as energy. We tend to see Spirit as the laws, as the stuff behind everything, the inner workings of the world, the inner workings of us and everything. And yet there's a part of us as human beings, I think, in the heavy, dense energy of our lives here on earth, that, you know, we want that love. We want mom's hugs. We want grandma's apple pies. We want to be tucked in. And so we were having this conversation. And I remember she introduced this piece out of the Bible to say that this is what Jesus was trying to say. This was his way of saying God is all there is. And all of this life is God, and God cares. And there is a nurturing, caring. You know, the sparrows in that cage over there are loved by God. They're part of God. God is in them, and they are in God. And it is that, and we talk a lot in our teaching about the birthright. And what is the birthright but to be held close and to love? And that's what I found out from those 5 women hanging out from them. And I found out between my mom and my aunt through about a year there with her daughter, her college-age daughter, I found out that, hey, nobody's going anywhere. You know, you're part of us. This is your birthright. It doesn't matter what parents do. It doesn't matter what you do. You can be upset. You can be upset at parents. You can be upset at your dad, your mom. You can be upset at the situation. You can use 4-letter words. You can threaten not to come home. You can, threaten to stay in Southern California, all that kind of stuff. But you are with us no matter where you go. You are with us. Over on the coast, in the coast area of California, there's a Native American court that has come up in the last, say, 10 to 15 years where the tribe takes care of a lot of its own court issues around criminal activities and things like that. And they're working with the county courts where they are. It's on the coast. And I watched the documentary. And the woman who is the judge of the native court is a lawyer. And she was one of the first Native women judges to ever be in regular court. She was a judge in the county she lived in. And then when this was started up, she went over to the tribal part of it. So she has experience as a judge. And she was asked, what's the difference in the two courts from your standpoint? For you, I mean, you're there to protect the law, and you're there to oversee the case and make sure that everything is done right, and also bring tribal law into it. But what's the biggest difference between, what you did as a judge outside the tribe and what you're doing on the inside? And she said the major difference is that because of our tribal spiritual beliefs, that we are not cut off from anybody, and no one is cut off from us. And this is what she said: someone might go to prison, but they will always belong to us. And no matter where they walk in this world, we want them to know we are behind you, no matter where you go. And when you come home, you are ours. And when you leave, you are ours, because there's nothing that changes that. And I believe that teaching within that tribe is a reflection of what we teach spiritually. No matter where you go, you are loved. And I went to this wedding and I saw all those descendants and so many people there who, all the aunts are gone now. My mom has left. I'm talking about left this physical world, made transitions. My mom's made her transitions. All my aunts have made their transitions. My grandmother made her transitions. All these women are gone. And I looked at their descendants. And I thought about the power within the family that came down. When you come together for a celebration like that, and you're seeing children and children's children, and these people, these descendants, and the bottle brush and the honeysuckle was there to remind us that there is a connection. Several years ago, when I was a minister and I was a pastor of a center, a spiritual leader, I was in my office one day and a gentleman came in. I'm going to just use his first name, and he has made his transition in years, and I just kind of want to say his name out loud because he became very important to me. He was a really wonderful person and taught me so much. He came to me in crisis, and he was a gentleman. I got to know his life story because when he came to me, he was kind of at the end of his rope. He was quite a bit older than I was at the time, and been through an amazing life, a very tough life. He was born in the Midwest into a heavy Italian Catholic family, very Catholic, and he was an only child in a very problematic marriage. His father was an alcoholic. His mother didn't know what to do with all that. She was trying to juggle it all and trying to put up with this man his father was really out of control with alcoholism in terms of violence and things like that. But because they were Catholics, they weren't going to break up. And he was, the gentleman Phil. He went into the Catholic school, and as soon as he reached that age where his hormones began to take over, and he was starting to figure out his sexuality, he found himself very confused, and he was trying really hard to be a heterosexual, but as it turns out, he would eventually understand that he was gay. And so he was trying to deal with those urges and those feelings that were coming up. And of course, the Catholic Church, at that time, their doctrines about that and damnation with that, and it wasn't sanctioned. And if you ever did that, you couldn't even be laid to rest in the Catholic cemetery and all kinds of things. And so he was going through it. And he came to a point to where he could not relate at all to the patriarchal part of his religion, the male masculine, the God is a male, him and he and father, and he just couldn't handle that. He didn't know what to do with it. And so he found himself gravitating towards a nun when he was in Catholic high school, who did this once a week, got together with kids who wanted to do it. And it was called the Marian Studies. It was based on Mother Mary. And I never really heard that before until he came to me. And anyway, we were talking, and when he first came in my office, and I kind of got ahead of myself. I apologize. When he first came in my office, it's like, he'd lost his partner. He had health issues. His family was long gone. He found himself alone. He had a lot of anger and bitterness towards the past. His mother had passed away some years before he came to me. He loved her dearly. And he just felt like he was at the end of his rope. And he said, I can't handle this God being a guy, and I can't, but what do I do? What do I turn to? Who loves me? Who cares about me? Where do I belong? Do I matter? What am I connected to? And so I began to bring what I had learned about, what I recognized was that he was looking for the feminine. He was looking for what I'm talking about today. And so I kind of went in that direction. He said, well, when I was in high school, there was this Marian group I went to once a week. And it was offered to both he went to a segregated high school where the men and the girls and the boys were separated, but it was kind of, and so, but for this one group that this nun did, this Marian study, she opened it up to both boys and girls, and he was one of the few boys in there. It was almost all girls. And she talked about, and he remembered how she brought forward the ideas of that. And I had never heard of that, and I did a lot of, and I listened to him. I listened to him educate me, and I did some research on it. And what I found out was in the 19th and early 20th century, Catholic theologians were beginning to put together what they called a Marian teaching, where and this is the mythology that they put together around it, was that Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, the mythology of it, was that when she went to heaven, she was the advocate, she was the prime advocate for Jesus, who was the advocate to God for the prayers that were coming forward. And what they said about this, which is really amazing, was they said, Mary, the strongest advocate for her beloved children. So we start right there. Her beloved children. I don't care where they're at. I don't care if they're in South America. I don't care if they're in the north, the south. I don't care what color they are. I don't care if they're in prison. I don't care whatever. Her beloved children. Through unconditional love. And this is the kicker right here. Dwelling beyond limited thinking, belief, or custom. Dwelling beyond limited thinking, belief, or custom. That's where, when Mary would advocate, she was not confined to anything conventional around judgment. And I wondered about this, so I researched it further. And within the mythology, because she had given birth out of wedlock, and because the Jewish culture at that time, just had such a horrible reaction to it, that she basically was this person who said, I don't care. It's my baby. I love him. This is my relationship with God. I love God. I don't care. You can't put me in a box. This is me. And so there's this idea of the feminine, the women, the 5 women, the aunts who come together and say, yeah, you may think Charlie is not talented enough to do whatever, but you know what? We don't think that. You don't know Charlie. Charlie's ours. We know Charlie. We love Charlie. We love you. We're here for you. You don't move beyond us. And when Phil came to me, he and I began to explore what he was telling me and what I was learning on my own about this Marian teaching. And then I kind of got into some Kuan Yin stuff too that I uncovered. And so for a while, for a few months, he came to me once a week, and we did this thing. He and I called it the Kuan Yin Boys Club because we would talk. When he would come forward with his issues, I agreed to show up from the sacred feminine point of view. And the prayer work that I did with him was centered and directed at the divine feminine. And what this brings forward is is the healing power of grace and compassion. Grace and compassion. When my mom was there for her sister and my cousin, the grace came in that my mom didn't take sides. My mom didn't fight with it. My mom, and believe me, my mom was she had strong ideas about things. She was opinionated. And she pushed that aside and was simply there for the compassion of these two women who were going through what they were. And that's what I remember Charles Fillmore talking about the idea when you look up Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, in terms of his metaphysical Bible definitions. He said one of the attributes he talks about is the thing about Mary, the thing about what she represents is she's all in. She's all in. Once you become pregnant, there's not like, I'm not really into this. And so, or once the birth happens, I'm not into this. We know from the New Testament that for a while she followed him around in his calling. In fact, a couple times they kind of got into it because she had some other ideas. And then it talks about, when he was crucified, in the mythology of when he was crucified, she was present. Present for his birth, present for his death, present all the way through. No matter where you go, the sacred mother, the sacred feminine energy is there. I love you. You're mine. I care about you. And I know for years I was a counselor in the correctional world. And sometimes I would supervise visits on weekends when mothers would come in and their sons, I worked primarily with men at that time, and their sons would do, the rap sheet was horrible and stuff. And and mom and dad would come in and dad would like take him to the woodshed over that rap sheet and what are you doing and stuff. But mom, I remember the moms who would say, wait a minute. Okay, you've had your say. Johnny, we love you. You're my boy. I don't see you in these prison clothes. I don't see you in this institution. I see you as part of me. And that idea of being present. And, I look at our world today, and there's been obviously a lot of people in our culture who are pretty upset, been upset for a while. We see demonstrations, and we see the reactions, and we see law enforcement, and we see the politics and everything. And I really believe that this world is going, because I am an optimist, this world is going to be a better place as more of the sacred feminine becomes expressed. People in the streets doing their thing, tearing things up, using bad language, whatever, when we can come forward and have compassion and love and say, you're part of us. Because right now, I think in America, we're into this whole thing of, we're starting to feel a lot of duality. The sacred feminine does not see the duality. The sacred feminine is not tribal. The sacred feminine just simply is, you're with us. You're us. You're our children. We stand the high watch on you. That's why in today's title, I put in the term high watch. I think that very often we hear the term high watch and we think of men. We think of soldiers on walls and those kinds of things. But the feminine high watch. To keep the eye there, to show up, to be present, to listen, to share, to place their arms around the tears, to be that place where every sparrow is known. Sparrows may not mean anything to you, but they mean something to me. They are known. And occupying that sacred feminine place, to be present for each other. Well, thank you very much for today. I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all of you out there, no matter what gender you are, because I believe that this sacred energy dwells within each and every one of us, and I am so grateful for it in my own life. Okay. So now we want to turn our attention towards the off